She can't count. Professor Julian Thorne's harsh voice rings out across Harvard's Sanders Theater. Nia Jackson stands frozen as hundreds of people stare at her with pity. The 17-year-old from Southside Chicago did not come for money, but to prove she belongs with the Ivy League elite. But Thorne took her $1.25 yellow notepad to help his favorite student, Oliver Hayes. Facing strict rules and stubborn professors, Nia only has her mind and her mother's silver bracelet to help her. Can her new math theorem force this proud professor to bow his head and apologize? 3 weeks before that moment, Nia's world looked nothing like Harvard. Her world was a cold apartment on 47th Street, in the south side of Chicago. The gas got cut off on November 12th. The bill was too high to pay. Nia boiled water on a small electric burner. It cost $12 at a pawn shop. She wore 2 sweaters at night just to stay warm. Her grandfather, Silas Jackson, sat across from her at the kitchen table. Silas used to work on the railroad. 40 years of hard labor left his hands swollen. Every joint in his fingers ached when the weather turned cold. He rubbed them slowly each night, trying to work out the deep, dull pain. He never complained out loud. He just kept a small bottle of pills on the shelf. Some months, that bottle sat empty because there was no money to refill it. But his eyes still lit up when he watched his granddaughter solve math problems. He did not understand the numbers. He never finished high school himself, but he understood the look on her face when a problem finally made sense. It was the same look her mother used to have back when she was young. Silas kept an old photo of Margaret taped inside a kitchen cabinet. Sometimes, late at night, he would open that cabinet and just stare at it. He never told Nia how much he missed his daughter. He did not need to. She could see it in the way his voice softened whenever he said her name. Nia studied on a cracked iPhone 7. The screen had a spider web crack in one corner. She watched free math lectures from MIT late at night. After her homework was done, she wrote her own ideas in a yellow notepad. It cost $1.25. Silas bought it for her from the corner store. He never missed a month. Around her wrist, Nia wore a thin silver bracelet. The bracelet had 2 words scratched into the metal. M.J. 1989 to 2018. Those were her mother's initials. Margaret Jackson died when Nia was 9 years old. The bracelet was the only thing Nia had left of her. She touched it whenever she felt scared or whenever she felt alone. She barely remembered her mother's voice anymore. 9 years is a long time, but she remembered the smell of vanilla lotion and a soft humming sound at bedtime. She remembered small hands guiding hers across a page, tracing numbers for the first time. Margaret had loved math too, before life pulled her in a harder direction. She never got the chance to finish her own studies. Money always got in the way. Nia carried that unfinished dream like a second heartbeat inside her chest. Every problem she solved felt like she was solving it for 2 people, not one. That night, Silas placed an old newspaper clipping on the table. It was torn from the Chicago Tribune, soft and worn at the edges. The headline read, "New England Math Olympiad, 22nd year, held at Harvard University." The prize was a full scholarship, $120,000. Silas looked at Nia with tired but proud eyes. "Your mother always said you were made for more than this street," he said. "Show them what Margaret's girl can do." Nia stared at the clipping for a long time. Her heart pounded with hope and fear. But the bus ticket to Boston cost $64.50. That was almost half of what they had for food that month. Nia shook her head. "I can't take that money, Grandpa. We need it here." She looked down at her worn-out sneakers. The soles were peeling away from the fabric. She thought about the strange equations in her yellow notepad. No teacher had ever seen them. She thought about walking into a room full of rich, confident students. "I don't belong there," she whispered. "They'll just look at my clothes." Silas looked at the floor. He did not argue with her. He never raised his voice. He simply said, "All right, baby girl. It's your choice." But Nia noticed the disappointment in his eyes, even though he tried to hide it. She lay awake that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling above her bed. She thought about her mother's unfinished dream, tucked away inside every equation she solved. She thought about all the nights she had spent hunched over that cracked phone screen. Was she really going to let fear win, after everything she had already built? Silas said nothing that night. He only nodded slowly and went to bed. The next morning, he placed a white envelope on the table. Inside were $65, all in wrinkled $1 bills. He had skipped his arthritis medicine for 4 months to save that money. Nia's hands trembled when she counted the bills. Tears filled her eyes. She understood then. This was not just money. This was her grandfather's sacrifice. She picked up the envelope and held it against her chest. "Okay, Grandpa," she said softly. "I'll go." The night bus to Boston left Chicago just after midnight. Nia sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into long yellow streaks. The bus smelled like old coffee and cold vinyl seats. An older man across the aisle snored softly, his head resting against the glass. Nia pulled out her yellow notepad and opened it under a small reading light. She traced her own handwriting, with one finger, checking every line of her theorem. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally won. She drifted off to sleep. She dreamed of her mother's hands, guiding hers across a page full of numbers. When she woke, the sun was rising, over unfamiliar hills covered in frost. 17 hours after leaving Chicago, the bus finally rolled into South Station, Boston. Nia stepped off, stiff and tired, clutching her backpack like a shield. The air felt colder here, sharper, full of a city she did not recognize. She checked a folded paper map for directions to the train toward Cambridge. Every step felt like walking into a world built for someone else. A short train ride later, Nia arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Harvard campus looked like something from a movie. Old brick buildings stood under tall oak trees. Students walked by in expensive coats, laughing and talking on new phones. Nia felt small. She gripped her backpack strapped tighter and kept walking. She got lost trying to find the check-in office. She wandered into a small seminar room by mistake. Inside, a woman in a gray blazer stared at a broken computer screen. Wires and cables covered the desk. Numbers flickered and jumped across the monitor. The woman muttered under her breath, frustrated. Her name tag read Dr. Chloe Brooks. Dr. Brooks was a guest judge from Caltech. She helped run the scoring system for the contest. Nia watched from the doorway. She saw the problem right away. The scaling formula in the code was wrong. It was a simple mistake, but a serious one. Nia did not say a word. She was too shy to speak to a stranger. Instead, she picked up a pencil from a nearby table. She flipped over her old bus receipt and wrote a short formula on the back. She placed it quietly on the edge of the desk and turned to leave. Dr. Brooks noticed the paper a moment later. She read the formula twice. Her eyes went wide. She typed the correction into the system. The screen stopped flickering. The numbers lined up perfectly. "Wait," Dr. Brooks said, standing up fast. "Who wrote this?" But Nia was already gone, swallowed by the crowd in the hallway. Dr. Brooks stood there holding the receipt, stunned by what she had just seen. She had no idea who the girl was. But she would not forget that handwriting. Later that day, Nia entered Sanders Theater for check-in. The room felt cold and grand at the same time. Wood panels lined every wall. The air smelled like leather and expensive perfume. Students laughed near the front row, wearing blazers and polished shoes. One boy stood out. He wore a suit that looked like it cost $1,500. His name was Oliver Hayes. He was Professor Thorne's star student. Oliver noticed Nia's worn sneakers and old backpack. He smirked and looked away. Oliver came from the Phillips Exeter Academy. His father sat on a Harvard donor board. He had studied under Professor Thorne for 3 straight summers. Thorne treated him like the son he never had. He praised every move Oliver made. In return, Oliver learned to see the contest as something already decided in his favor. He did not think of Nia as a real competitor. He barely thought of her at all. To him, she was simply someone who did not belong in the room. A staff member at the check-in table looked at Nia's paperwork twice. "You're from DuSable High School?" the woman asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, ma'am," Nia answered quietly. "I'm an independent entrant." The woman handed her a paper badge with the number 142 on it. Nia looked around the massive room, counting rows of unfamiliar faces. Nearly every student wore a blazer, with a school crest stitched on the pocket. Nia wore a plain gray hoodie, faded from years of washing. She noticed a few curious glances, quickly followed by whispers behind cupped hands. She kept her chin up and walked straight to seat number 142. Nia walked to her seat and sat down. Her hand found the silver bracelet on her wrist. She held it gently and took a deep breath. This is real, she thought. I am really here. The first round began. The problems were hard, but fair. Nia worked quickly, filling page after page in her yellow notepad. Numbers came to her like old friends. Her pencil barely stopped moving. Halfway through the round, Oliver Hayes leaned over toward her desk. He held out a shiny gold pen. Here, use this, he said, with a fake smile. I doubt your pen can even make it to page 3. Nia said nothing. She kept her eyes on her paper and kept working. She had skipped breakfast that morning to save $8.20. Her stomach growled loudly during a quiet moment in the room. A young volunteer named Marcus noticed her shaking hands. He worked the student help desk. Marcus quietly walked over and set an apple and a cup of water by her seat. He did not say anything. He just gave her a small, kind nod. Nia looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you." Marcus was a sophomore at Harvard, studying on a need-based scholarship of his own. He knew what it felt like to walk into a room full of people who assumed you did not belong. He never forgot that feeling, even after he earned his place here. That was part of why he volunteered for the contest every single year. He liked helping kids who reminded him of his younger self. At exactly 10:47 in the morning, the main screen displayed a sample equation. Professor Thorne had written it himself to guide the students through part 2. Nia stared at the numbers. Something felt wrong deep in her chest. She checked the equation again, tracing every symbol with her pencil. There it was, a serious error in one of the boundary values. If left uncorrected, the mistake would throw off every student's final score. Nia's heart pounded. Should she say something? Or should she stay quiet and safe? She thought about her grandfather's swollen hands and the money in that white envelope. She thought about her mother's bracelet resting against her wrist. Slowly, carefully, Nia raised her hand into the air. The room went quiet. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Professor Thorne looked up from his notes, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Yes? What is it? He asked, his voice sharp and impatient. Nia stood up. Her knees felt weak, but her voice stayed steady. Sir, I think there's a mistake in the boundary value of the equation, she said. A few students snickered. Oliver Hayes rolled his eyes and smirked at his friends. Professor Thorne walked toward the microphone at center stage. His face grew red. He had spent 22 years running this contest. No student had ever challenged him. Julian Thorne had built his whole life around being right. He grew up in a wealthy Boston suburb, the son of a Harvard professor himself. He entered these halls at 18 and never really left them. To him, rules were not just guidelines. They were the walls that kept his world safe. He believed talent came from certain schools, certain neighborhoods, certain kinds of families. He never said this out loud. He told himself he simply believed in standards. He told himself he was protecting the integrity of real mathematics. Deep down, a challenge from a stranger felt like an attack on everything he had built. And a challenge from a poor black teenager from Chicago felt, to him, impossible to accept. She can't count, he said loudly into the microphone. His words echoed through the giant room. Laughter erupted from every corner. Thorne pointed at Nia's high school name badge, printed in small letters. DuSable High School, he read aloud, mocking the sound of it. I'm not surprised a student from that school can't follow simple math. Nia felt her face grow hot with shame. Her hands began to shake. Thorne turned to a nearby staff member and pointed at Nia's desk. Confiscate that notepad, he ordered. I want to see what kind of nonsense she's hiding. A staff member walked over and grabbed the yellow notepad from Nia's hands. This looks like some kind of cheat sheet, Thorne said, holding it up for the room to see. Bringing outside material into my contest? That is a serious violation. No, sir, Nia said, her voice cracking. Those are just my own notes. I promise. Thorne ignored her. He noticed the silver bracelet glinting on her wrist. And what is that? He asked, stepping closer. Some kind of hidden code device. He reached for her wrist, trying to grab the bracelet. Nia yanked her arm back fast and slipped the bracelet into her pocket. Her whole body trembled. but she refused to let him touch her mother's memory. She stood alone in the center of the theater. Every tool she had was gone. No notepad, no pen from home, just a single piece of white chalk in her hand. The whole room stared at her, some with pity, some with cold amusement. Nia walked back to her seat in silence, gripping the chalk tightly. Around her, the room buzzed with quiet whispers. A girl in the second row leaned toward her friend and shook her head slowly. "That wasn't fair," she whispered. She just asked a question. But no one spoke up out loud. No one wanted to be the next target. Marcus, watching from the side of the stage, clenched his jaw in silent anger. He wanted to say something. He wanted to defend her, but his job was on the line. He settled for catching Nia's eye and giving her a small, steady nod. It was not much, but it told her one thing. Someone in that room believed her. That night, Nia lay awake in a cheap motel room near campus. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the humiliation over and over in her mind. Her phone, cracked and old, buzzed with a text from her grandfather. "How did it go today, sweetheart?" the message read. Nia typed back slowly. "It's hard here, Grandpa. But I'm not giving up." She thought about the bracelet in her pocket. She thought about the money he sacrificed. Giving up was never an option. Not for her. Not for Margaret's memory. She closed her eyes and pictured every page of her confiscated notepad from memory. She could still see her own handwriting, line by line, burned into her mind. She whispered the theorem softly to herself, the one about balance and unheard voices. Maybe tomorrow she would need it. Maybe it was time to trust her own mind. Outside her window, the lights of Cambridge blinked against a clear autumn sky. Somewhere out there, Professor Thorne was probably sleeping soundly, certain of tomorrow's outcome. Nia closed her eyes and allowed herself, just this once, to believe in a different ending. The next morning brought the final round of the contest. This round was different. Students had to present their work live, on a chalkboard. Professor Thorne stepped up to the microphone, holding a folded piece of paper. "For our final challenge," he announced, "I have prepared something special." He revealed a complex game theory equation, based on his own unpublished research. 5 years of work, condensed into one impossible problem. 45 minutes on the clock. Oliver Hayes smiled confidently. He had studied Thorne's research papers for months. He had spent late nights in Thorne's private office, reading drafts no one else could see. He knew every shortcut, every trick hidden inside those 5 years of research. He felt ready. He felt certain that today would be his moment to shine. Nia had nothing. No notes. No reference books. Just her memory and a piece of chalk. A soft hum came from the air conditioning system above the stage. Somewhere near the back wall, a clock ticked, with a slow, steady rhythm. No one in the theater made a sound. Every eye stayed fixed on the countdown timer. The countdown clock started. Numbers began to blur across every student's page. Oliver worked fast, filling half his board, within the first 15 minutes. He glanced over at Nia, with a smug, satisfied grin. Nia stood frozen in front of her blank chalkboard. Her mind felt empty. She closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured the cold apartment back home. She pictured her grandfather's swollen hands, wrapped around that white envelope. She pictured her mother's face, soft and warm, from an old photograph. "I am not backing down," she told herself. "Not today. Not ever." She opened her eyes and looked closely at Thorne's equation one more time. Something clicked deep inside her mind. A memory from her yellow notepad came rushing back. It was the same pattern she had once shown her grandfather, late at night. He had not understood a single symbol on the page, but he had listened anyway, nodding along as she explained it out loud. "Sounds like you're talking about people," he had said, surprising her. "People who get forgotten. People the world treats like they don't count." Nia had laughed at the time, but the words stuck with her for weeks. She had studied a strange pattern many nights ago, all on her own. It was a theory about balance among things the world often ignores. She called it, in her private notes, dynamic equilibrium of the unheard. Nia realized Thorne's whole equation rested on a false assumption. He treated one key variable as fixed, but that variable was never fixed at all. It moved. It shifted. It behaved like a living, breathing thing. Nia set down her chalk and took a slow, deep breath. She did not try to solve Thorne's broken equation. She built something new instead. Her hand began moving fast across the chalkboard, line after line. She was not copying anyone's method. She was creating her own path forward. Numbers and symbols filled the board in clean, confident strokes. Around her, some students turned to watch, confused by what they saw. This did not look like anything in their textbooks. Chalk dust drifted through the bright stage lights like tiny falling stars. The squeak of chalk against the board became the only sound in the theater. Even the ticking clock near the back wall seemed to fade into silence. Rows of students, once whispering and laughing, now sat completely still. A few leaned forward in their seats, unable to look away from the board. Professor Thorne noticed the commotion and walked toward Nia's chalkboard. His eyes scanned her equations. His face slowly drained of color. She was touching the exact weakness buried inside his own unpublished research. His hands began to shake. Cameras from local news stations were rolling live. Panic crept into his voice. "Someone remove her from the stage," he snapped. "She is disrupting this ceremony with nonsense scribbles." Two security guards moved quickly toward Nia's chalkboard. Oliver Hayes stepped forward too, eager to help shut her down. They reached for the chalk tray, trying to pull Nia away from her work. Nia gripped the tray tightly with both hands. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes never left the chalkboard. She refused to stop now. "Please," she whispered. "I'm almost done. Just a few more seconds." The guards did not listen. They tightened their grip on her arms. Suddenly, a clear, strong voice cut through the noise. "Stop!" Dr. Chloe Brooks called out, rising from the judge's table. The entire theater turned to look at her. "Let her finish," Dr. Brooks said firmly. "This is not vandalism. This is a mathematical proof, and I believe it is brilliant." The security guards froze, unsure of what to do next. Dr. Brooks walked briskly down the aisle toward the stage. She recognized the handwriting on the chalkboard immediately. It matched the bus receipt. This was the same handwriting that had fixed her broken scoring system days earlier. "This young woman helped me, before any of you even knew her name," she announced. The room fell into stunned silence. Even Oliver Hayes took a step back. With the guards standing down, Nia turned back to the chalkboard. Her hand moved steady and sure, finishing the final integral of her proof. The equation balanced perfectly. Every piece fit into place like a puzzle solved. Thorne's own research, the work of 5 long years, crumbled under the truth. His base assumption was broken. His entire theory could no longer stand. For 3 long seconds, Sanders Theater stayed completely silent. Not a whisper, not a cough, just pure, stunned stillness. Then the room exploded into applause. Loud, thunderous, unstoppable applause. Students stood from their seats. Reporters pressed closer with their cameras. Dr. Brooks stepped up to the microphone, her voice full of pride. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our champion," she said. "Nia Jackson." The crowd roared louder. Flashing lights filled the grand old theater. Professor Thorne stood frozen at the edge of the stage. His face had gone pale. 22 years of pride were crumbling in front of 10,000 online viewers. He looked at Oliver Hayes, but his star student only looked down at his shoes. There was nowhere left for Thorne to hide from the truth. Dr. Brooks handed him a folder with trembling hands of his own. Inside was the official scholarship certificate. $120,000, guaranteed. "Sign it," Dr. Brooks said quietly, but firmly enough for everyone to hear. Thorne's hand shook as he picked up the pen. He looked at Nia, standing tall despite everything he had done to her. For the first time in 22 years, Julian Thorne lowered his head. "I was wrong about you," he said, into the microphone, his voice breaking. "I let my pride blind me. I am sorry, Miss Jackson. Truly sorry." His pen hovered above the paper for a long moment, before he could bring himself to move it. Every eye in the theater watched him, waiting. 22 years of certainty cracked open in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. He thought about his own father, another proud Harvard professor, watching from somewhere far away. He thought about all the students he had dismissed over the years, without a second thought. None of that mattered now. Only the truth on the chalkboard mattered. He signed the certificate slowly, his signature shaky but final. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the yellow notepad. He walked toward Nia and placed it gently back into her hands. "This belongs to you," he said. "It always did." He also returned the silver bracelet, still safe from earlier that day. Nia took both items and held them close against her chest. Her fingers trembled as she slipped the bracelet back onto her wrist. The crowd kept cheering, but Nia barely heard them anymore. All she could think about was her grandfather waiting back in Chicago. A local reporter pushed forward with a microphone in her hand. "Miss Jackson, can you tell us how you came up with this theorem?" she asked. Nia paused, still catching her breath from the moment on stage. "I didn't come up with it today," she said. "I've been building it for 2 years. In a $1 notepad at my kitchen table after everyone else was asleep." The reporter's eyes softened. She scribbled the quote down quickly in her notebook. Another reporter asked about the silver bracelet still gripped in Nia's hand. "It was my mother's," Nia said simply. "She passed away when I was 9. I think she would have loved today. I think she was here, in a way." The crowd around her grew quiet, moved by the simple honesty of her words. Dr. Brooks stepped in gently, placing a hand on Nia's shoulder. "Let's give her some space," she said kindly to the reporters. "She's earned it." She guided Nia toward a quieter hallway backstage, away from the noise and flashing lights. "You did something remarkable today, Dr. Brooks said, her voice warm and sincere. "Not just the math. The courage it took to keep going. That matters just as much." Nia managed a tired smile. "I almost didn't come. The bus ticket felt impossible." "Well," Dr. Brooks said, "I'm very glad you found a way." She handed Nia a business card with her university email written on the back. "When you're ready to think about college, call me. I mean that." Nia took the card carefully, tucking it into her jacket pocket next to her heart. Marcus, the kind volunteer from the help desk, ran up with his own phone. "Here," he said, smiling wide. "Call him. Right now." Nia dialed the number with shaking fingers. It rang twice before Silas answered. "Grandpa," she said, her voice cracking with joy and tears. "I did it. I won, Grandpa. We're going to have heat again. I promise." On the other end, Silas Jackson began to cry too, his voice thick with pride. "Your mother knew," he said softly. "She always knew you were special." Nia stood outside Sanders Theater as the sun began to set over Cambridge. Golden light spread across the old brick buildings and tall, ancient trees. She looked down at the yellow notepad in one hand and the bracelet on her wrist. Both were worn, both were humble, and both meant everything to her. She thought about the cold apartment on 47th Street, waiting for good news. She thought about the warm gas heater they could finally afford again. She thought about her mother, smiling somewhere far beyond the stars. Reporters called her name, asking for interviews and photographs. But for a moment, Nia just stood still, breathing in the crisp evening air. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a girl from DuSable. She was Nia Jackson, mathematician, dreamer, and her mother's proud daughter. Back in Chicago, neighbors gathered around a small television in a corner store. They watched the clip of her chalkboard-proof play again and again on the news. Word spread fast through the South Side. A local girl had beaten Harvard's best. People who had never met Nia now spoke her name with pride. The owner of the corner store, Mr. Alvarez, taped a printed photo of her by the register. "That's our girl," he told every customer who walked through the door. A local barbershop played the news clip on repeat for an entire week. Teachers at DuSable High School showed the video during morning announcements. The principal called an assembly just to talk about what Nia had done. For the first time in a long while, students at DuSable felt proud of their school's name. The very name Thorne had once used to mock her became something to celebrate. Weeks later, Nia returned home carrying a folder full of scholarship papers. Silas met her at the bus station, standing taller than she had ever seen him. He wrapped his arms around her, ignoring the pain in his swollen hands. "Welcome home, champion," he whispered into her hair. That winter, for the first time in years, their apartment stayed warm. The gas was back on. The old electric burner sat unused in a corner. Nia still kept her yellow notepad on her desk, right next to her books. It reminded her where she came from and how far she had traveled. Professor Thorne, humbled by his public apology, changed the way he ran his classroom. He started a new scholarship fund for students from underfunded public schools. He named it, quietly and without fanfare, the Margaret Jackson Fund. Dr. Chloe Brooks stayed in touch with Nia, offering guidance for the years ahead. She often told colleagues about the girl who fixed her computer with a bus receipt. Talent doesn't care where you come from, she liked to say. It just shows up. Oliver Hayes, humbled by the loss, later reached out to apologize as well. He and Nia became unlikely research partners the following summer, studying under Dr. Brooks. Marcus, the volunteer who once shared his apple, stayed Nia's close friend for years. He liked to joke that he discovered a genius before anyone else did. Nia went on to study advanced mathematics, carrying her mother's bracelet everywhere she went. Every equation she solved felt like another promise kept to her family. Every late night of studying reminded her of that cracked old phone from home. She never forgot the sound of her grandfather's voice on that borrowed phone. She never forgot the weight of that white envelope filled with wrinkled dollar bills. Some people are born with everything handed to them. Nia Jackson built her future with a $1 notepad and pure determination. She proved that brilliance does not care about zip codes or bank accounts. It only asks for one thing, a chance to be seen. And on that stage in Sanders Theater, in front of 10,000 strangers, she finally was. Years later, Nia would stand on other stages, in other grand old halls. She would speak to students who reminded her of herself, nervous and unsure. She always told them the same thing, without fail, every single time. Bring your own notepad. Bring your own voice. Never let anyone take either one. She kept that first yellow notepad locked in a small wooden box on her desk. Its pages had gone soft and yellow with age, the corners worn smooth. Every time she opened it, she heard her grandfather's voice, warm and steady. She heard her mother's hum, faint but never fully gone. And she remembered a cold apartment on 47th Street, where it all began. A place where a 17-year-old girl once dared to believe she belonged. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Nia still pictured that first bus ride out of Chicago. She pictured the frost on the window and the ache in her tired legs. She pictured her grandfather's hands, wrapped tightly around that white envelope of dollar bills. None of it had been easy. None of it had felt certain at the time. But every hard step had carried her forward, one page at a time. Belief, she learned, was not a single moment. It was built slowly, day after day. It was built in a cold kitchen, under one dim light, with a borrowed pencil. And once it was built, no one could ever take it away again.